this. All right. I'm going to start out. I sent you the agenda, and I'm going to start out by asking if you have any questions about anything.
Dr. Todd, I have a question.
Yes.
I guess I'm a little confused on, okay, like, so we are in week 2, correct?
You are in week 2 starting today.
Right. So the OMA task 1 is due this week.
By Monday of next week.
Oh, I thought it was due by tomorrow. I got that thing submitted.
Now, some of you have already submitted them. See, if you'll, and let me go ahead and try to share my screen. Let's see, make sure I can get where I'm looking for. Yes, that's the page I want to share. I tried to write the date that the week starts and the date that it ends. So in week 1, you have from the 21st to the 27th. So for week 2, you have the 28th through the 3rd. Now, anytime you get it done ahead of time is great, because I will try to read it and go ahead and respond and let you move on. But yes, it actually ends on the Monday night, and we're meeting on the first day of the next week.
Got you. Okay. I was a little bit confused.
Okay. All right. And that's real good question. One of the things, the reason I wanted to show this is to point out some of the places where your assignments are to go. For example, in week 1, if it'll go there, I put your readings that go with the assignments at the top, and then I left all of the pieces that Dr. Lamb has for you to look at too. And then I put your assignments, and each one of those assignments should link directly to the discussion board. And so that will take you right to where you need to be. For the task, I will tell you to begin working on them. And then I will go back and show you where the tasks are to be loaded. Under discussion board, the tasks are also loaded under the discussion board, like the OMA 1, OMA 2, and OMA 3 for review, so you can get there that way. But then when you've made the changes based on what Dr. Bullis and your peer reviewer and I suggest, then you go into the OMA assignments drop box. And that's where you do the task 1, 2, 3, 4 is not reviewed because it's a reflection. It's your reflection. I review it. And then you do the task stream screenshot once you have it evaluated. You also put your peer reviews, the ones you do. And I give you points on the ones you do, not the ones that's done for you, but the ones that you do. And then there is your final, when you put it all together, you go under the turn it in check. And that's where you post it. And that's your final. I will give you whatever percentage it tells. Then I will tell you whether that's high or it's acceptable. If it's really high, it means there's a lot of the paper that has been used before, and maybe it's not referenced correctly, or you may have used it in a previous task and it'll show up again. So that's where that is. And then I will tell you if I will tell you if I find anything else that I think you need to address. And then I'll tell you to go ahead and put it on task stream.
Dr. Todd.
Yes.
I had a question about that because one of my teammates, one of my group members, and another coworker of mine, we all were at the same school. We're all doing the same program at the same time. So pretty much all our information is the same. I mean, how would that affect our grades?
It shouldn't affect it as long as you are referencing where you're getting your information from.
Okay.
Now, it may make it a little bit higher, but as long as we know what's going on and that you're using the same set of data, that's happened before. So it should not be a bother. But if it turns out being real high, then remind me of that when I send you an email or a comment. But that's a good question. That's a good question. All right, any other questions about that? All right, the other thing that I want to talk about tonight before we get into the actual agenda is I want you to read ahead. We're not really going to, you're not going to really work on it until week 3. But what I want to do for this first task of the case study is I want us to discuss it as a group, and I want us to talk about the whole case. Then I want us to talk about the questions that's related to it. And then for this first one, I'm not going to make you do anything except write a reflection because we're going to do it in class. But then for the other 3, you're going to be doing them in your small groups. Now, I am going to change the assignment a little bit differently because we learned last semester when we were doing these that everybody's reporting the exact same thing. So I'll split up I'll let 1 or 2 groups do one of the questions and then 1 or 2 groups do the other question, and we'll do that when we get closer to that point in time. But if you will, before next Tuesday night, if you will, please read over this and look at this particular case study, and we're going to talk about it. And here's the questions that go with it, and it's all under case study 1. All right, any other questions about anything related to Blackboard or the way I set the class up? One of the questions that came up today is, did I give points for the draft? Yes, I give points for the draft, but I don't count off a lot. If I find things missing, I'll just usually say this is missing. Now, where I will take off points is if in the draft, I make a whole lot of comments about what needs to be done, and then you turn in the same thing again and haven't made any changes, then I will take off some points then. But I don't take off points to keep you from getting your A. I take off points because something is missing, and or I find a lot of errors, but I don't take off enough points that it's going to hurt your grade. So it's just more or less to let you realize that, hey, there might be something else that could be here. But yes, you do get points for the draft. You get points for your written peer review of the one that you do for your teammate, and you get points for your final. So there's actually each one of the first 3 tasks would have 300 points. With each part gets 100 points. People find that, you know, I do find a lot of errors, but I don't take a lot of points off. I'm not trying to catch you. You still have a chance to get it better, even if you make a low grade on one. I'll let you resubmit as long as it's not just something at the very end or something that you totally intentionally left out for some reason. All right, any questions about that? Okay. I'm going to try to switch. Now, are you able to see the agenda for tonight on yours? Is it showing on my screen? Yes? No?
No.
You're not able to see it. Okay, let me see what's going on.
We still see the case study.
You still see the case study. All right. Let me go to a new share. All right. Is it showing now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think this course is school law, and it's also school finance. Those are probably 2 of the most important courses that you'll have the entire time that you're working on your degree. Those are the 2 areas you can get fired for the quickest. And so it's really important that you be aware of the information you have at your hands and what you have in your textbook and what you have in the information that Dr. Lamb has given you. But that's why I wanted to, I'm not going to read the whole thing. I put all of this for you all to look at, but I wanted us to look at When you're a principal, you're going to be looking and making decisions about whether or not your teachers are doing their job. So if you're the teacher, this is one of the reading assignments that you had. A duty of a teacher is to maintain order and discipline, to provide for general well-being of the students, to provide some medical care to students if it's needed, to teach the students, to enter into the superintendent's plans for professional growth, to discourage non-attendance, and to make required reports. So that's the duty of a teacher. And then there's a paragraph that tells that the superintendent may require a teacher to make reports to the principal and those kinds of things. In addition, you have to help take care of the school buildings, primarily your classroom. Or if you find anything that is inappropriate or torn up on the playground, then you need to report it. You don't have to do all of it yourself, but you need to make sure that people know if there's a problem so it can be fixed. So when you think about that, that's what you're looking at that your teachers are supposed to be doing. Now, it's really important that you keep those things in the back of your mind, as well as look at the information on the evaluation of teachers, because that's another piece that goes with what they're supposed to be doing. The second part is, if you are the principal, you need to know what you're doing. And the law says that principals are to grade and classify students. Now, that's the first thing that you hear. And it's A under the law. It is the principal's job to grade and classify pupils. Well, now, not many principals are going to make that decision on their own. They're going to get the help of teachers, and they're going to get the information the teachers have and use that to help make a good decision about whether a child needs to be in a certain grade and those. So that is one. Then the principal is supposed to make accurate reports to the superintendent and to the local board. Many of the times, the reports that are asked for by the superintendent are also shared with the Board of Education, or they may be shared and sent to Raleigh as well. The principal is to give suggestions to improve instruction and community spirit. Right here's one that you have to do, and it's really important that you do. You're to conduct fire drills and inspect for fire hazards, and that is done monthly. Unless things have changed, you have to do the first fire drill within the first 10 days of school, and then you have to do one every month thereafter. So that is extremely important to remember, because it can cause issues for you if you don't get that done. Then you are to discipline students, and you're to assign duties to teachers with regard to discipline, general well-being, and medical care of students. So, you know, it's saying that it's your responsibility to make sure that during class transitions as a principal, you have all those areas covered. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit here from the law, but give you an example of why it is so important that you have people's in various places, and if they're not there, you need to get somebody in those places when they're coming to school and during any transition time when everybody's out in the halls. One of the first, I was actually a principal in a assistant principal pre-K through 6th grade school when this happened. But one of the first acts of violence that happened on a school campus happened in the hallway before school started, and it was in Western North Carolina. And if you don't have every place covered, then you can be liable for not having the people in the places they need to be where they can supervise. As it turned out, when this incident happened, and I do think a child was killed, and it was a knife incident. It wasn't a gun, and it was back in the early 90s, I want to say, late 80s, early 90s. In this incident, The assistant principal who was responsible for making sure that everybody was where they were supposed to be had just been up and down the hall and had checked to make sure that everybody was in their duty place, and they were. And so therefore, the school wasn't liable for negligence because the people were where they were. So when you think about, some teachers think, why do I need to be in the hallway? Kids are just coming into school and they're sleepy and all that. Well, some kids come into school and they may be sleepy, but there may be others who are just mad. So it's your responsibility to make sure that the hallways are covered, where anywhere where students might be, there's someone to supervise. Another responsibility is to protect school property. And then there is the reporting. There's certain things that you need to report to law enforcement and the superintendent. And this is where sometimes it gets a little muddy, but look at what the law says. When the principal has personal knowledge or actual notice from school personnel that an act has occurred on school property involving assault resulting in serious personal injury, sexual assault, sexual offense, rape, kidnapping, indecent liberties with a minor, and so forth and so on, the principal shall immediately report to the act to the appropriate local law enforcement agency. Now, don't ever report anything to the law enforcement agency before you report it to your central office. You need the backing of your central office with that as well, because it can get very ugly as you're going through all that. So, those are things that you can't not handle. You have to handle them. And you're not equipped to be the person to do all of the investigation. Someone else should be helping you investigate, and they're trained in it. Law enforcement's trained in it. So at some point, once you have enough initial information, you notify your central office, and then you notify your local, maybe the SRO. It may be if you're in a city, it'd be the town police. If you're in the country, it'll be the sheriff's office. But you turn certain things over, and you don't have a choice in that. The other things that principals are required to do is evaluate licensed employees and develop mandatory improvement plans, transfer student records. Now, a lot of this is not now left at the individual school level. Sometimes it comes through the central office because so much is on computers, but that's still the principal's responsibility. If they're no longer coming to your school and request is made for their record, your school sends it to the other school. Then you have the driving eligibility certificates and notification to the DMV. You sign the driving eligibility certificates. You get the necessary written information to disclose information to the DMV, and then you notify the Division of Motor Vehicles when a student who holds a driving eligibility certificate no longer meets those conditions. And then the other things that you're required to do is establish a school improvement team and address the unique needs of students with immediate family members in the military. And that's sort of been one that's added in the last few years, more so than others. So those are things that as a school principal, you need to be aware. This is what is expected of you to do, and it's expected by law. So I just went over the headings. Feel free to look more in depth at the other parts as you go along, and we will hit some of these in some of the later pieces and some of the activities that you do as well. Now, one of the reason I put this next piece in here, the paradigm of ethics, it's in one of your readings that goes over the principal's role and responsibilities. This is asked for in that task one. I mean, not task one, but case study one. So it's talking about paradigm of ethics. And so it's talking about justice, care, critique, and profession. So those are the four paradigms of ethics that's included in this information that's been given to you. And for justice, it's talking about fairness, equity, and justice. You know, a standard. Is it reasonable suspicion versus probable cause? Is it arbitrary and capricious? Those are terms that are legal terms, and you will hear it often whenever anything goes to court. And then corporal punishment in some states is illegal, in others it's still allowed, but I would tell you to be very, very cautious about ever using corporal punishment. And if your system still allows it, then I would say cautiously use it. And then it goes over, it mentions Jim Crow laws and metal detectors, and it says they are legal. And then under care, it's looking at loyalty and trust, concern and connection, nurtured and encouraged versus achievement, relationships, collaboration, shared decision-making, connections, attention and support, discipline, and prodding. And then critique is talking about corrupted morals, power, critical theory, social class, incident offense type versus action type, and human rights. And then under profession, accountability for student academic and social success, model principles of self-awareness and so forth, safeguards the values of democracy, equity, and diversity. Now, as you get into some of the tasks that you are doing, equity and diversity are often things that are mentioned as something you're supposed to be looking at and figuring out how to do. And then consider and evaluate the potential moral and legal consequences of decision making, promote social justice, and ensure that individual student needs inform all aspects of schooling. And you always are to use in under this particular profession, one is best interest of students, rights, responsibilities, respect, and is everything that you're using to make decisions, is it in the student's best interest? So that's what you are looking at as you're looking at case study 1. Now, what I did for chapters 1, which you were to read, in chapter 15, is I tried to pull out some points that I think might be of most importance to you as you go through and are becoming a principal and being trained to be a principal. The first chapter is on preventive law, and I encourage you to read this chapter and chapter 15 because of what it's saying. Preventing liability should be a high priority in your daily operations, and so this is what that school had just done, and therefore they had taken care of everything, and they had done everything they could to prevent somebody from getting hurt. And so that is something that you need to think about as you're doing duty rosters. And schools should have duty rosters. And I know teachers don't particularly care for it all the time, but if they understood the reason behind it, I think they would understand why do it. Also, many of the teachers would say, okay, I don't have students this time, let me take the morning ones, and then somebody else do something else. So a lot of times they'll come up with good ideas, but they are always looking to make sure you're being fair. One of the things as you become the principal is to always try to have a preventive law mindset. And particularly what you're looking for is crisis management and school safety. Now, I am betting that most of your schools have some kind of crisis management kit, or they have a crisis management chart that tells you what you do for various situations that occur in your school. Is that correct? Do most of your schools have that? And you all know exactly where they are, and hopefully they're revised every year and not just left the exact same each time. That is one of the things that you will need to make sure that you do, is that you, whenever you become the principal, don't just assume, okay, it's done, I don't have to look at it again. That's one of the things that principals do in the summertime, is they go back over everything that they have, and they look and make sure that what they've got still makes sense, and that the people, if they have listed who's in charge of certain things, that those people are still there. If not, they need to fix that and change it. When you're looking at school safety, one of your assignments asks you to go and around your school and look at the property and the buildings, and it asks you to assess whether everything is safe or not. And so as you're doing that, that's one of the links. As you do that, that'll help you really see your school in a different light. So crisis management and school safety are a big, big part of making sure that you have a preventive mindset and that you are doing things to keep people from getting hurt. Now, I put this next one in because as a superintendent, I had more than my share of working with the media. And I think it's one of the things that you all need to be prepared for. In this day and age, and even when I was working, we had bad things happen. They just do. And when they happen, you have got to be the professional, and you have got to be the one that presents it to the community, especially through the media, in as positive a manner as you can. It's not unusual to see that a teacher's being discharged or placed on leave because of some type of inappropriate actions, and that's actually one of the case studies we're going to be talking about. It just seems to be common happenings. We would hope that it would not happen, but it seems to happen all too frequently. So you have to be prepared for that. Also, one of the incidents that I remember when I was a superintendent is we had a person to embezzle money from a PTA. And the key there was we had to make sure that the community knew that this person was being turned over, but that the community would still support that school because they had needs, and that as best we could, we were going to get that money back, and that the school could be trusted. So, you know, you have to be really careful what you say. And there are some retired TV people who have become consultants to school systems, and some of your larger school systems, you don't have to worry about this because you have your own hired media person. But the smaller school systems do not have that luxury. So that's where the principals are really key, as well as the superintendent. And most of the time, the superintendent will work with the principal in who does the speaking to the community. Now, when I was the superintendent, if it happened at a school, I wanted that principal to speak for that school, but I would talk very quickly with the principal and say, okay, this is the message that we need to get out, that our kids are still safe and that we're having school. And so, you know, but the parents needed to see the face of that principal. So, you know, different communities and different superintendents look at things differently, but I felt like when we had those situations, the key was to have that particular school principal there. So one of the things I always encourage anybody, even if the reporter is your best friend, be careful what you say to them. Always talk with your school superintendent or your assistant superintendent or whoever is over, if you're a large school, whoever's over your area, about what it is you need to say and what's the message that you need to get out. And remember, even if you ask a reporter to not say something, anything you say to a reporter may be reported because they don't always have the ethics that you want them to have. So you've got to be careful. You also only give facts. You do not give your opinion. You do not give your thoughts. You give facts. You want to focus your message and keep it legal and keep you out of a liability situation. So while something is being investigated, you're not going to comment about the student or the teacher. You're going to say, when we received these complaints and concerns, we turned it over to the appropriate law enforcement, and they are investigating. And that is all that I can say at this point in time. So you keep your message very focused. Now your reporters will come around and ask you all kinds of questions, and they'll come in the back door to try to get those answers. You just keep going back and saying, you know, we're in the process of investigating it. I cannot make any more comments than that. That the information that was given to us, we've shared with law enforcement, and they are handling it. If you are going to be on television with a reporter asking you questions, one of the best things you can do is practice with somebody you trust with anticipated questions. And that way you will have an opportunity. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is actually videotape it so you can watch yourself. Sometimes your facial expressions will give away too much. Sometimes you'll say too much. Sometimes your reactions to their questions can tell more than you want it to. So practice. And you've got to become very familiar with what you want to say, what your message is, regardless of what questions you're hit with, and try to always refocus it. Now, does anybody have any questions about that? No questions? All right, then I'm going to go ahead and go to this next section, which comes from chapter 15. Chapter 15 in your textbook talks about the principles tort liability for negligence as applied to expected duty and standards of care. And I've gone over various concepts that you need to be aware of regarding school law. Law of torts is one of the first things that you'll be hearing. And it's an actionable wrong against a person, property, or reputation of another, exclusive of breach of contract. And the law will recognize this and will set it right. They're historically classified in 3 categories. Direct invasion of someone's legal right, like invasion of privacy. Breach of some public duty that causes some damage to an individual, such as some type of denial of constitutional rights. And the violation of some private obligation that causes some damage to an individual, such as negligence. It's where you failed to act in a proper manner, then it can fall back on the school and you. The concept of reasonable and prudent person, this comes into play when you're dealing with the courts. The reasonable and prudent person has physical capabilities comparable to whoever the defendant is. They have normal intelligence, perception, and memory. They have a minimal level of experience, and they possess any superior skills that the defendant possesses or presents himself or herself as possessing. So in other words, you're trying to find someone that's similar to the person. Then the concept of foreseeability. If the educator could have or should have foreseen or anticipated an accident, the failure to do so can be ruled as negligent. All right, what is one of those situations that you think that could be ruled as negligence? You got any ideas?
Would that be like a child getting hurt on the playground due to the teacher not paying attention or something?
Yes, ma'am. That's a good example. Any other examples? Now, if a child is hurt on the playground and the teacher's there and just couldn't stop it, that's not negligence. But if the child is on the playground, there are no adults there, or all of the adults are congregated in one little place and they're talking and not paying attention, that can be negligence. Doesn't always be seen as negligence, because it would depend on what kind of instructions were given. What about a science teacher? What if a science teacher had several different chemicals sitting around, and some of them could react and cause an explosion? Would that be negligence?
Wouldn't it depend on the circumstances?
It would depend on the circumstances. You're exactly right. It would depend on the circumstances. What would be the set of circumstances where it could be looked at as negligent?
I mean, if she didn't tell them how to use them and they weren't labeled correctly and, she wasn't watching them, that could be negligence.
That's right. Or if you only set out the chemicals and the things that you need for whatever science experiments you're doing. So if you had, let's say if you put pneumonia and Clorox next to each other, is that a smart move? No. I mean, I said pneumonia, ammonia. I said the wrong thing. If you put ammonia and Clorox next to each other, is that a good thing?
No.
No. What can happen?
Production of chlorine gas.
And that can be a deadly gas in the right circumstances. So you would not want to use those two together. So you would need to make sure you had what you needed for a particular science experiment. And that's all you would want to have easy access to. Some things that could cause some deadly reactions, you would want to keep locked up and only pull out when they were needed. So that's the kind of thing that's looking at foreseeability. It expects the educator to perform as a reasonably prudent person. You will hear those terms in courts. Of similar training and circumstances should they have to perform. Degree of care is based on the standard equivalent of age, training, maturity, and experience, as well as any other related characteristic of the educator. The next one is concept of standard of care, and that's the degree of care necessary to protect students from foreseeable, this is the key word, foreseeable risk of injury or harm. And it's based on the particular circumstances, the age, the mental and physical qualities of the students. So age, when they're really young, they're not going to be able to remember all the things that they would need to remember as they got older. So those are all part of the pieces. The standard of care is higher when the child is really young and when they're very immature. And it's also higher when students have diminished mental learning or physical abilities.
And we're actually going through this right now at my school.
Uh-huh.
A teacher is claiming that our materials were not working properly, such as the vent hood for the chemicals. Okay. And we're in a high school. So we're going through the legal process, her as a teacher. And so we're having to use the students, as factual information.
And you will get into those situations. And
yeah, it's a mess.
They're not pleasant, are they?
No, it's intense.
Yes, and it will be. And everybody in that whole wing is going to be involved in it. And it's just not a pleasant thing. So if there's things that you can do ahead of time to keep this kind of thing from happening, that's what you want to do. The next one is this concept of the age of plaintiffs. For some reason, the courts have used it based on the rule of 7. Children are expected to exercise a degree of care for their own safety in proportion to their age, their capacity, their experience, and their intelligence. Typically, courts have held that children from birth to 7 cannot be considered negligent under the law. They're too young to understand it all. So then the concept of negligence is another term. There must have been a duty to protect. That's where the school comes in. We're expected to protect the children when they're with us. There must be a failure to exercise a standard of care, and the conduct must have been the proximate cause of the damage, and there must be an actual loss or an injury. So, it's not negligence unless those 4 things are there. And then there's 3 terms: nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. Nonfeasance is failing to act when there's a duty. It's an act of omission. Misfeasance is acting improperly, and it may be an act of omission or it can be an act of commission. And then malfeasance is acting but guided by bad motive. An illegal act that should not be performed at all occurs when the individual acts beyond the scope of duty. So I would like for you to look in your textbook, and this is in the school law textbook at pages 365 and 366 regarding suggested risk management guidelines. We're not going to go over those, but I wanted you to have them and to look at that so that you would know where to go. Like I said, dealing with money and dealing with law are two of the areas that principals need to take really seriously and be as prepared as possible. And the negligence and thinking ahead and having things in good shape, that's really, really important. Do you have anything? I have just hit the highlights and brought out the things that I thought was probably most important for beginning principals to have a basic knowledge of. One of the things you will learn is that the laws change. So I always kept the North Carolina state statutes, the school law portion, in on my desk. And back when I was the superintendent and principal, they had them in books, and we would get them every 2 years. Now they're all online, but you are expected to know what changes, and you're expected to keep up with those changes as the legislature makes the laws. And one of the things that you need to realize is sometimes the things that you're asked to do at your school that don't make a lot of sense probably did not come from your state, from your county, but it has filtered down to you from the state. I actually talked with one of our representatives one time, and he was telling me the intent of the law that the legislature had passed. I don't remember what it was now, but what their intent was and what came to us after it went through the whole legal attorneys in Raleigh was two different laws. And I'm convinced our legislatures want to do the right things for us. But after it goes through all of the various lawyers and they have to get through the appropriate spin on it, then it may not look exactly like what they thought they had passed. Another thing that sometimes happens is sometimes the legislature will say, okay, this needs to happen. These schools need to improve. We're going to give the State Board of Education the responsibility for this. And if they can't get it fixed, then we will do it with a law. You're much better off to work with the State Board of Education and get things accomplished through them than you are to have to for it becoming law. And I can think of several laws that have affected schools that I thought this really didn't need to happen. For example, one of them was the start date of school. And when you could start no earlier than close to Labor Day, and you could end no later than the 10th of June. Well, if you're in a mountainous county, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So they had to come up with exemptions at the very, very start. The other thing that didn't make a lot of sense with all of that one was most of the school systems that had community colleges in their area had worked out where they were trying to start at the high school about the same time the community college did, so that their juniors and seniors could take advantage of college classes on the campus of the community college. So with them starting in the middle of August and the school system not starting until the 1st of September, you had at least 2 weeks that either these kids were going to have to go to school before they had to, and then you were going to have 2 or 3 weeks at the end of the year when they were going to have nothing to do because their classes are over. So, you know, there was a lot of things that went into that, and it wasn't exactly in the best interest of the school systems. But it occurred, and we had to live with it. And then, you know, they did have to come up with exemptions, and the weather exemptions were part of it that were allowed. So that's just one simple example that if it had been left up to the state board, they would have probably been able to deal with it a little bit smoother and easier than when it becomes a state law. Another part was, and I'm not saying this is wrong or anything, but at one point there was actually a law telling what guidance counselors could not do during testing time. And the funny story that goes with all of these things is who these legislatures talk to, and it's usually their neighbors. or is somebody that's got a business. For instance, the start time of school, that was based on one of the extremely influential legislators who needed the students to work through, in the tourist industry on the coast until Labor Day. And so when you find out what's behind some of these, and I never did find out exactly what was behind the guidance counselor, but my guess was that the neighbor of one of the legislators was a guidance counselor and was complaining about what they were having to do during testing. So, you know, there's so many things that we wind up having to deal with law that we are thinking, where did this come from? And we may never know, but it, you know, sometimes it will come from a state law and it will say you have to do it this way. And so for several years, until we had some opportunities to make some switches and change it around, that's when you started school, when you ended school, unless you were in one of the mountainous counties and you missed a lot of days. So, you know, those are the kinds of things that affect what happens. The state board, if they're given a task and say, we're not going to address this session, you all figure out a way to fix it, then they may come back with things and say, we need you to do this. And that was one of the conversations I had with this legislature. He said, Barbara, we didn't do that. We sent that to the state board. That's from them. Well, you know, that's one of the things you have to understand is you have the legislators passing laws. They can tell the state board to do things. Then the state board sends it down. And most of the time, your local school boards will pass a law that ties into what they just, or ours are policies, will pass policies that tie in with the laws. And then that then gets passed on down to you. So that's sort of the way you wind up with some of the things that you wonder, okay, where did this come from? And I think you will always have that. The last thing I have on our agenda tonight is just reminders. Draft of Task 1 of the OMA is due during the second week. What I'm seeing of those that have turned them in, they look good. The biggest issues that I'm seeing is it's not organized exactly like the rubric, so you're going to make your evaluators hunt, and you don't want to do that because they're getting all of them in at one time, and you want them to be able to complete yours just as quickly as possible. And in other words, you want them to see it. So try to put your subheadings to match what is on the rubric, and then try to follow that so they can find it. I'm finding some of the issues are with reference formatting based on APA. APA, and there's an example in one of the pieces that Dr. Lamb gave you at the end of the syllabus, I think is where it is. APA, for example, will have the first line of the reference to the edge, and then the next one will be 5 to 7 spaces in, and the second, third, and fourth, if it's that long of a reference, will all be indented. Then your next one goes back to the end, to the edge again, and it's all double spaced in APA. So make sure you look at that. Don't forget to include your references. That's what can help with your keeping your Turnitin scores higher, is making sure you include your references and that you cite the reference throughout the paper. You post your first draft under the discussion board after receiving your feedback. Then you put your revised document under assignment Dropbox. And then I'll tell you whether there needs to be some more revisions or whether you need to go on to the next. And I always want you to go on to the next task because we've got to get them finished this summer. Activity 1 is due week 1. Activity 2 is week 2. And please read ahead case study 1. Now, I have done a lot of talking and we have covered a lot of information. So do you have any questions for me now? Did I go too fast? Did I cover enough to help you understand some of the things that's really important in schools? I hope I did that.
I have a question about the rubric portion.
Okay.
So I guess I'm looking at the the prompt, and then I looked at the I guess it's the rubric for task 1, and I guess well you'll see when you see I did put the headings, but I guess I'm maybe not sure if I used the correct headings.
All right. The thing that you have to do, and I'm suspecting you did do the right ones, you do have to use the headings for the description. And you want to make sure in that description you have what it's calling for. And then the rubric, most of the time, is over to the side, and it will follow right along with it.
Okay.
The first half of that one was, I mean, it's got some parts that's not directly related to the rubric because it asks for demographics, and I don't think the rubric directly asks about demographics, but that's got to be there in order for it to go on. And then I think it's management, is it structures, operations, and something that's in that first part. And then the second part is a little bit different, and I don't have it right in front of me, but we went over it last week. But that's the things that you're looking for, is you want the rubric, everything that's in the actual description needs to be there. And then you always look to the third column, and then the fourth column's almost identical, is the accomplished. The proficient's what you have to have. Accomplished is nice. In some situations, you're not going to have the opportunity to do them, probably because it's a summer, and you may not have the opportunity to present some of this information, but you can go ahead and do an agenda for some evidence. You can do a PowerPoint and have it ready, and then try to set it up for whenever your principal will allow you to do that. Did that clarify for you?
Yes, ma'am. I see what you're talking about now. It makes sense.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have a question? All right.
Professor Todd, I had a question regarding the comments you were making about law and the school start time. It's more specific to just my school, so I don't mind waiting until after you kind of dismiss class.
Okay. All right. All right. If no one else has a question, I'm going to stop recording, and then everybody can leave the class that doesn't have a question. Will that work? Okay. I'm going to stop the recording.